Hi, today we're going to be talking about applying proportional reasoning. Please follow along in your worksheet as I teach the worksheet up here. There's going to be two ways that we can approach these problems, and I'm going to switch off methods so that way you can see both of them. Starting with problem 7, it says, a giraffe is 18 feet tall and casts a shadow of 12 feet. Corey casts a shadow of 4 feet. How tall is Corey? The first way you can solve this is by creating similar triangles and then using those triangles to solve a proportion. So I'm going to make a line here to represent the giraffe, and I'm going to label it giraffe so I don't get confused later. And I'm also going to label it 18 because it is 18 feet tall. Next, I'm going to represent the giraffe's shadow. You can see that if the sun is coming from where the problem number is, it would cast a shadow that would lay on the ground, and that would be the giraffe's shadow. The shadow is 12 feet. And then we can connect these 2 points to create a triangle. We're going to do the similar thing with Corey. So Corey, he's going to be represented with this blue line. We don't know how tall he is, so I'm going to label it Corey, and I'm going to label it X. We don't know how tall he is. But we do know that his shadow is 4 feet tall, and that's the shadow. Again, I'm going to connect the lines to create a similar triangle. The way I'm going to set up my proportion is I'm going to make sure that everything is lined up, and I'll show you what I mean. For example, one ratio that's going to go into my proportion is going to be 18 over 12. 18 represents the giraffe's height, and 12 represents the shadow's height. So you can see that the 18 and 12 both come from the same part of the triangle. Now I'm going to have an equal sign. Corey's height is X. We don't know how tall Corey is, so we just represent it with an X. You can see that the 18 is still represented with the 12 on one side of the proportion, and along the top of the proportion, the 18 and the X, which both represent heights, are lined up as well. The 12 should then be lined up with the 4 because those are the shadows. So I have my proportion here. Now I'm going to solve my proportion using the same method that we've been using in class, which is finding the cross product to create an equation. So I'm going to circle my 18 and the 4 and the 12 and the X. On one side of my equation, I'm going to have 12X. On the other side of my equation, I'm going to have 18 times 4, and 18 times 4 is 72. Divide both sides by 12, and I get X equals 6. So I know that Corey is 6 feet tall. That's one way to solve this. The other way to solve problems like this is using the Tic Tac Toe method, and that's what I'm going to show you in the next one. So problem 8. When a Ferris wheel casts a 20-meter shadow, a man 1.8 meters tall casts a 2.4 meter shadow. How tall is the Ferris wheel? We have the same type of information that we were given in the last problem, but instead of creating triangles, I'm going to be showing you a method called the Tic Tac Toe method. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can be more accurate. You are going to be creating a tic-tac-toe board in a box, and you want to leave a little bit of room above the box to label it. So there's my tic-tac-toe board in a box. I'm going to set it up to show you where my proportion is going to go. So there's a fraction bar, there's an equal sign, and there's a fraction bar. I'm going to have one ratio there, and then I'm going to have one ratio there. The way to make sure that everything is lined up correctly with its corresponding part is to label it on the side. So I'm going to label the whole top row wheel to represent the Ferris wheel's measurement, and I'm going to label the bottom row man to represent the man's measurement. Now I'm going to label the top of the box. So I'm going to make the whole left-hand column represent the actual height, and I'm going to make the whole right-hand column represent the shadow height. Now I start to fill in my information like a puzzle. So the Ferris wheel casts a 20-meter shadow. So under wheel and shadow, I'm going to label 20. So it lines up under wheel across the top, and it lines up under shadow across the right. A man is 1.8 meters tall. So I'm going to put in 1.8 for the man's height, and that comes from right here. A man is 1.8 meters tall. The next thing I'm going to fill in is he casts a 2.4 meter shadow. So under man and shadow, I'm going to label it 2.4. How tall is the Ferris wheel? So we do not know the Ferris wheel's height, and that gives me the last bit of my proportion. In order to see the proportion better, I'm going to write it off to the side. X over 1 8/10 equals 20 over 2 4/10. Everything is lined up. My whole top represents the Ferris wheel, my whole bottom represents the man, my left represents the height, and my right represents the shadow. I'm going to use the same method as before to find the cross product so I can make an equation. So I have 2 4/10 x on one side of my equation, and on the other side I have 20 times 1.8. So 2 4/10 x equals, now you go use lattice or traditional, whatever you are most comfortable with. 20 times 1 8/10 is 36. Divide both sides by 2.4. So on one side I will have x, I'm going to work up here. One side I will have x equals 36 divided by 2.4 is 15. So the Ferris wheel is 15 meters tall. Okay, problem number 9. I'm going to read it out loud, and then I would like you to pause the video and try the problem on your own. Afterwards, I will go over it. A flagpole casts a shadow 28 feet long. A person standing nearby casts a shadow 8 feet long. If the person is 6 feet tall, how tall is the flagpole? Choose either method you would like and set up this problem with the proportion. Please pause the video and only press play again when you are either finished or stuck. Okay, hopefully you finished that problem. So I'm going to go through this problem a little bit quicker because you should be a little bit more of an expert on this. I'm going to start by creating my tic-tac-toe box. That's my favorite method. You might have done it with the triangle method though, and that's fine. Alright, so I have flagpole, and I have person, and I have their height, and I have the shadow. And then I'm going to set myself up with my fraction, or I'm sorry, my proportion, which has two equivalent ratios. So a flagpole casts a shadow that is 28 feet long, so the flag shadow is 28. A person standing nearby casts a shadow 8 feet long, so their shadow is 8. That person is 6 feet tall. How tall is the flagpole? Alright, so I have x over 6 equals 28 over 8. You would do cross product and then solve the equation, and I ended up with x equals 21. So the flagpole would be 21 feet tall. Alright, so hopefully you got that. If you didn't understand that, then go ahead and watch the beginning of the video again. I'm going to ask you to pause the video now and do problems 10, 11, and 12. After you do those problems, I will go over that answer. Please pause the video now. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to do those problems. So for 10, the proportion I came up with is 4 over 5 equals 120 over x. This would be a good time to mention that sometimes your proportion is going to be upside down or flipped from what mine is. For example, if you look at problem 9, if you had switched where flag and person were labeled, if you had labeled person on the top and flag on the bottom, your proportion would have been upside down from mine, but you still would have gotten it correct. Same thing with if you have flipped height and shadow. If you wrote height on the right side over here and you wrote shadow on the left side, your proportion would be flipped left to right from mine, but again, you would still get the same answer. As long as your cross product gives the same result, you will get the same answer. So looking at problem 10, I have 4 over 5 equals 120 over x. So my cross product is going to have me multiply 4 and x and 5 and 120. So I'm going to get 4x equals 120 times 5, which is 600. But if you notice, maybe you wrote your proportion like this. 5 over 4 equals x over 120. It looks totally different from the first proportion I showed you, but look, when I do the cross multiplication, I'm circling the same numbers. I still have 4x equals 5 times 120, which is 600. So your proportion might look slightly different than mine, but you still should get the same answer as long as you've set everything up correctly. In either case, you're going to be dividing by 4, and I got x equals 150. So the mural is 150 inches long. Number 11, I had the proportion 9 over 6 equals 15 over x. Again, yours might have looked different than mine, but when you go to circle and do your cross product, hopefully you had 9 being multiplied by x and 6 being multiplied by 15. 6 times 15 gives you 90. Divide both sides by 9. X equals 10. So at what height? 10 feet. Number 12, my original proportion is 16 over 20 equals x over 15. One more time, that it does not matter if your proportion is flipped from mine as long as you have 16 and 15 in a circle and you have x and 20 in a circle. So 20x equals 16 times 15, 240. Divide both sides by 20, and you get x equals 12. The reason that you only have to do one proportion in problem 12 is because you see that the original triangle is 16 and 16 and 20. The new triangle is it has two sides that are exactly the same because the two 16s in the original were the same, and then the 15 matches up with the 20. So if you solve for what corresponds with the 16 in the first triangle, you're really solving for both of those 16s at once. So the new triangle should be 12, 12, and 15. So even though we only solved for the 12 once, we know that the other one is going to give us 12 as well. All right, I hope that you learned something and I hope that makes sense to you. Watch the video again if you are unsure, and thanks for your focus.